Today, I want to break down how to give an effective sales presentation. And this is not only from my experience in my own career, where most recently I've been selling to Fortune 100 companies and banks, flying to their headquarters in person, presenting to dozens or hundreds of people, but also throughout my sales career, I've sold virtually via Zoom calls, via other virtual chats to some of the fastest growing companies in the world. And I see a lot of information on the internet about how to give a perfect elevator pitch and how to give a killer demonstration to a prospect. But they always focus on the delivery itself. And quite frankly, in 2025 and beyond, there is so much information available on the internet, whether it's YouTube, your company's website, your company's webinars, that if your whole focus is just how to deliver a 90-second elevator pitch or how to give that perfect presentation and you're just memorizing things, you're no better than a pre-recorded YouTube video that a customer can just watch at their own time and their own convenience. And so today, I really want to focus on not just how to give an effective presentation and demonstration to your customer, but also before that, the key things that you should be able to ask and really understand from your customer first, before then being able to take that information in real time and give an effective presentation that ultimately gets them to take the next step, whether that's signing off on a purchase or even just agreeing to do a trial or maybe introducing you to another executive. This should equip you in any case to really get what you want out of every single interaction when you're presenting on behalf of your company. So first and foremost, again, before even giving a presentation, I've broken down some of the most important things you should consider and ideally ask your prospect before even giving a presentation in the first place. And by the way, this is a framework and I totally understand in a game time situation, you're not always going to be able to get every single piece of information from your prospect that you would like. But if nothing else, if your prospect isn't even willing to talk for 5 minutes about some of these things before you see a demo, they may not even be that serious in the first place. And quite frankly, you could just refer them to a generic YouTube video if they just want a bland demo. But I digress, that's getting more into the tactics of an actual sales cycle. When it comes to the presentation itself, there's really a few key pillars that you should try to understand. And that's the current state of what they're doing today, the pain associated with that, if there's any limitations or shortcomings of the products they're using, then the desired outcomes. What does this mean for the employees themselves? What does this mean for the business if you can even extrapolate all that way out? But lastly, and why I've put this in red, I think one of the biggest mistakes the modern seller makes when giving a presentation is if you do a great job. If your customers really like what they saw, so many people just have a vague idea of what they want to do next, when in reality, if you have a very compelling presentation, this is a very unique opportunity to make a strong ask of your customer. This could be, ultimately signing off, of course, if you are in a more transactional sale, but in a longer deal cycle, if you have a really compelling presentation that gets people interested, now is your time to make a strong ask to get introduced to a director or a manager or a different team within the organization to really make sure that you can spread and multi-thread into the account and ultimately be talking to decision makers along the way. So just a few quick notes here. And again, the intention is a framework. I understand that you may not be able to get every single one of these things out, but it should give you a good gauge of how to even develop these questions specific to your company. When we're talking about current state and my space, which is a highly technical sale, what are they even doing today? What tools are they using? Why did they choose those tools? Where does this tool fit into their roadmap and objectives 3 to 5 years from now? What are their goals 3 to 5 years from now? And I think so many sellers are just so anxious to pitch. They're not even thinking about, I wonder if I could contrast this to what they're doing today and also fit this into their roadmap long term. Also, very similar but distinct is this point of pain. You want to spend a lot of time here understanding the current state. It's not a loaded question. We're not trying to trick them into saying what their pains and shortcomings are. But once we understand the current state, we can show our expertise as sellers and say, hey, really appreciate that. And we often do talk to users of XYZ competitor product. And we notice that some of the limitations are X, Y, and Z. You've hinted at a few of them, but are there current limitations with what you're doing today? What does that cost you from a dollar, from a time, from a productivity perspective? And also, you mentioned 3 to 5 years from now, your goal is to do this. Well, if you didn't change it, would you even be able to accomplish that? What's the impact of doing nothing and keeping everything the same that it is today? So again, there's a lot of hypotheticals here, and you need to tailor this specific to your company, to your competitors, to your product, to your features. But hopefully this gives you an idea if you have never really sold anything or you're trying to give an effective, highly tailored presentation, having this information in place really cues us up to then position ourselves as a very differentiated product. But lastly, on top of that, I think the biggest thing that sellers, again, especially if you're new, especially if you're a rookie salesperson, or maybe you're a founder that doesn't have past sales experience, you get the current state. You get the pain and you say, oh, that's costing you $100,000 because you can't automate things and that's a limitation. Great, because that's exactly what we do. And that is the number one mistake I see is you jump the gun. Because again, maybe that is a real pain. Maybe they are losing $100,000. But if you're selling to some of the largest banks in the world that have hundreds of thousands of employees, a $100,000 problem is nothing. That is problem number 167 of the 2 million things that they're trying to fix this year, right? So it's really important to understand, not only first and foremost for the employees that you're speaking with, what does that mean to them? But hey, why ultimately, if this costs, say, $500,000, what is the business outcome to you guys? If you can automate X, Y, and Z, you mentioned that it takes 10 employees to do that currently. Is that, the scope of the benefit to the business? Are we just replacing 10 employees, or what does that look like, right? And again, many different questions we could ask here, but the common mistake and thing that I hope this highlights is just because they use your competitor, just because that competitor is not really fulfilling their needs, does not mean that the outcome, if they switch, is significant enough for that business to then invest months or years to actually implement your solution. So when you understand the outcomes themselves, you've started to really triangulate amongst all of the information you have, what are the most critical things you should then demo to the company itself. And lastly, again, I just want to reiterate this point. If you have uncovered a lot of these things, if you give a solid presentation, now is your time to make that stronger ask to get in front of that executive or get them to agree to a trial or get them to sign ultimately that proposal, whatever it might be. But looking now with all of this information that the prospect gives us, we're now equipped to actually give a meaningful presentation. And I'm taking in a scenario where maybe you've got 5 to 10 people on a Zoom call, or maybe you're in person and you have 30 to 50 people. The way that I break this down most simply is that I've loosely drawn an attention graph here of what happens over time, because I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are the best speaker on the planet. If you have more than 5 people in a room or on a call at any given time, their attention is going to fade over any time period of more than 5 to 10 minutes. So with that being said, with all of the information you've just gathered via conversation, maybe a prior phone call as well leading up to this demonstration, the biggest thing that I want to emphasize right away is the largest impact and outcome. So after you've gotten all this information from your prospect that we just went over, the way that I think about this, again, if we're in front of a crowd, is what is the largest impact and outcome right away? And just because it's the largest impact and outcome, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is what's ultimately going to get them to buy at the end of the day. But if you reorient everyone and show them immediate value towards some of the biggest problems they're having, that is what you want to show first. And I'll give you a real example from my own career. I sold a deal to one of the fastest growing e-commerce companies in the world, and they reached out to us in the beginning of October, right before Black Friday, because their existing database could not scale to meet their peak traffic. And this is not even Black Friday weekend when everyone's buying everything online. A month before, during their busiest days, they were already failing and they were in sheer panic mode. Very quickly, when talking to them, there were so many features that I could tell them that would have fixed their problem. We were so confident that we were a great solution. But at the same time, this CTO, who is of course worried about the database going into Black Friday, but at the same time managing 20 other technical problems at any given time, I need to very quickly, as succinctly as possible, communicate to them how much we can solve their problem with the first feature that I show. And what I've listed out here, and one of the biggest problems is, again, you don't want to be that standard cookie cutter demonstration where it's like, okay, well, thanks, I'm going to share my screen now. First, when you're joining our platform, you create an account. Then you create a team, and here's where you can add your team members and X, Y, and Z. Don't waste your time on giving them just boring admin things. Jump right into the biggest problem and the biggest ROI that they're going to get from your platform. And in the example of this database use case, it was literally a matter of, hey, Mr. and Mrs. CTO, you mentioned that you can't scale. I just want to mention right out of the gate, we actually work with several users that are using your database currently that transitioned over to our company because of this feature here. And from everything that I've heard, this is the most relevant thing and really where I want to start my presentation today. This feature is going to do X, Y, and Z for you. And at the same time, the benefit for you as someone who now has to transition databases is it actually functions the same as your current provider. But the enterprise technology, the things things that it does under the hood are actually solving your scaling challenges underneath the hood, while you, your developers, your engineers are still writing to that database just as you're doing today. I didn't talk about how to create an account. I didn't talk about how to set up a service. I didn't talk about how to hit go or turn the service on and off. I didn't talk about, here's some of the biggest things our customers say about our product when they first log in. They're like, wow. None of that. I get straight into the biggest benefit for the customer right away. The reality is, in the scope of a busy executive's life, in the scope of a busy employee's life, they're taking so many internal and external meetings. You really have one chance to really quite frankly, incept them with whatever it is the most important thing. You want them leaving that call to say, hey, I'm going to be honest, the pitch from Eric was really compelling because they told us that we can basically do what we're doing today, but their enterprise technology, which obviously we would have to pay for, but it actually does all the scaling things that we need under the hood. That is the storyline you need them to take back to their team. But again, just because we've done that, obviously people are going to want to see more. How do we then, after we've shown the largest impact and outcome, continue the conversation to still try and capture attention while it exists? And in my opinion, after you've shown the largest impact and outcome, now usually the executive is not the person that's actually going to have their hands on the keyboard or actually get their hands dirty and implement the solution. So that's where the second third of my presentation goes to, where I'm actually pitching to the champion or the person who is actually going to be doing a trial or actually implementing the solution itself. So I've mentioned already, hey, our database is going to allow you to do what you're doing today and solve a lot of those problems under the hood. Mr. Mrs. Champion, I know you're the one that mentioned you would probably be implementing this yourself. You'll notice this feature here is also going to give you the ability to do X, Y, and Z. And again, I'm just loosely approximating the attention here, but as you call out that person by name on the call, everyone's attention is going to perk back up because they're like, oh, he's calling on someone directly. I should probably listen a little bit. And here's your chance to then again show the second most relevant feature. And again, this is more to the champion or the person that's actually going to be implementing the solution themselves and getting their hands dirty with your product. And I don't want to make it sound simpler than it is. Obviously, you've got to work with your team, and there's more than just 2 features you can show at any given time. But if you're doing this and really creating a very strong narrative to where these people that are in your presentation can go back and have 2 to 3 major talking points about what's impressive with your solution, that is how you win. They don't really care about how to set up an account. They don't really care how it integrates and look at this low-level integration with your Gmail or how it does X, Y, and Z. You really want your presentation geared around the biggest benefits that everyone can largely understand. Lastly, again, as you get to Q&A and next steps, again, just approximating here, but most everyone's kind of checked out at this point. Maybe someone asked a really good question towards the end, but at this point, it's really about taking note of those questions, certainly answering them if you have the ability, but also really taking them back to your team, getting them more specific answers, even asking them individually, why is that question important? So you're asking about this feature, is there any particular reason you need that or want that, et cetera, et cetera. And as you set up next steps, again, it's more the tonality of my voice. I'll be like, hey guys, this was a great presentation. I appreciate the time. Everyone, even if they've zoned out, has realized and gets that cue of like, oh, this is wrapping up, let me focus in. And if it has gone well, you have to get this next step very explicitly stated. It's not, hey, can we meet with another team? It's, hey, I noticed the software engineering team that deals with X, Y, and Z product within your company was also interested in this. Who would be the best person we could have another meeting and give this demonstration to as well? You've got to be precise with that ask. You've got to really control that, again, if this presentation has gone well to this point. Lastly, in terms of a few things that I've learned the hard way throughout my career in terms of do's and don'ts, absolutely internal alignment. If you're selling with multiple people from your side, have, again, the entire call mapped out with an agenda you've sent to your team beforehand, with maybe even a walkthrough of what you want to show them in the first place. Also, if there are past conversations, when you're giving a presentation to your customer, maybe it's the second or third call, and now you're really giving that in-depth demo. It's not just, hey, here's a cool feature that I think is relevant to you. It's like, hey, Mr. Mrs. CTO, one of the biggest challenges you mentioned was with scaling specifically. So that was my thought in starting our conversation today. From what I understand, this feature is going to be able to solve a lot of those problems. So I wanted to show you X, Y, and Z. Be very specific, not just most of our customers benefit from this feature, or we notice users of X competitor benefit when they get in our system because of X, Y, and Z. You're very specifically referencing conversation points you've had with those customers specifically. Also a do here, but simultaneously a don't, is validate the value of what you're showing. And it's not just through a question of like, was that valuable? But when you're showing that to the prospect and CTO, You're not asking a yes/no question. Hey, was that valuable? It's more on the order of, you mentioned and walked us through how this is a limiting function today. When you see our solution and what I've shown you now, how does that actually fit into the broader landscape of what you're doing, right? Again, hypothetical question, but it's not a yes or no. It's getting them to talk and actually get a sense for if they think it's valuable or if they're just kind of going through the motions with you. And lastly, on the do side, this is also an opportunity to do further discovery. If you are showing them a demonstration and they're just kind of tacitly approving everything you say, like, oh, cool, yeah, that looks good, now's your chance to really understand if this is valuable or not. And it's not just to try and force them to sell them. It's you don't want to waste your time if they're not all that serious about it in the first place. But lastly, if you guys have made it this far, just a few don'ts when you're actually presenting as well. Don't just present because they ask. If you have a customer that shows up and they're like, hey, I don't really want to answer any questions, I just need to see a demo, quite frankly, refer them to a YouTube video. Give them a YouTube video and ask them what they think, because when they do that and they're not willing to put in any work or research, or they can't even articulate what your solution might even solve or why they're interested, they're wasting your time. I mentioned already, don't ask generic questions like, was this valuable? What do you guys think? Those things are setting you up to fail because, again, in the case that it's going well, you'll get a good response from that. But in the case that it's going poorly or you're missing the mark, if you say, what do you guys think? If a customer is just realizing that this maybe doesn't really fit to what they're doing and or they're just more of an introverted person, if you just ask these generic questions, they're gonna be like, oh, it's good, it was good, yeah, I'll think about it, and not give you the information you need to know. So it's not, was this valuable? It's not yes or no questions. It's, what does this mean for you specifically? Does this address some of the things that we talked about earlier? And lastly, I really just want to reiterate, when you're giving a presentation, when you're giving a demo, do not waste time in creating an account. Here's how you create an account. Here's how you create a team. Here's how you do X, Y, and Z. Unless they've really specifically mentioned that access and things of that nature are important, forget all of the administrative steps. That is for when you actually get to a trial, you actually get to the point where your customer is ready and willing to actually test your product or buy and implement your solution. But again, just restating for those of you that may be new to sales or trying to give a presentation, the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place is because there's a ton of videos and information on how to pitch, how to give a presentation, how to throw in that dramatic pause. And my opinion, quite frankly, is that stuff may or may not help, but it's not really relevant and modern to a 2025 and beyond sales cycle. If you don't understand what your customer is even doing today, if you don't understand if they actually have pain, if you don't understand what the positive implication of using your solution is, and equally important, where that outcome ranks on all of the company's priorities, sure, you can give a presentation, but you're gonna get 4 to 6 months down the line, and that executive who's responsible for signing off is gonna be like, oh, what? You guys were focused on this? Like, guys, we have this other initiative to get X, Y, and Z solved by the end of the year. Why did you waste your time on this? This isn't even on my radar. I make it sound easier than it is. I know in a game time situation, you're not always going to be able to get all of this information on one call or one interaction from one person. But if you're not constantly checking in with yourself about why you're even giving a presentation in the first place, if this is even relevant to your prospect, you're setting yourself up to fail, whether it's a week, a month, a quarter, or a year down the line. And also, again, when you are giving that presentation, when you are giving that demonstration, you've got to assume no matter who the person is, no matter how impressive they are, no matter how on the ball your prospect seems, in the scope of a 30 to 60 minute presentation, everyone's attention is going to fade. You've got to take control and show them the most relevant things, get right into it, not waste time with administrative features and boring stuff of starting an account, saving your information, all of that stuff. Get right in, get in control of the situation, make this hyper relevant to, I would say, the biggest problem first and foremost, and then your biggest champion that wants your team and wants your product in-house. That is where you orient 2/3 of your conversation. And once you actually establish next steps, if this has gone well, you've got to have a very clear and large ask in terms of if it's meeting that executive or if it's signing a proposal. Again, only if a lot of things have gone well, that is your opportunity to really advance your deal and take it to the next level. So if nothing else, I hope you got a lot out of it. Our channel, Tech Sales with Higher Levels, has the most free information on sales and tech sales on the internet. So obviously we'd appreciate a like and subscribe. And I still to this day monitor the comments myself. So if you have any questions, you're trying to perfect your presentation, fire away below. Happy to help. And yeah, hope you guys got a lot out of it. Thanks.